And I'd like to introduce Patrick O'Connor, who is the chair of the National Landcare Network. And Keith hopefully will stay in the background and listen to these talks, as will the other panelists, and we can all join up again later. So is Patrick with us? Yes, he is. Excellent. Can you screen share if you're showing a PowerPoint? Patrick is talking about further empowering local action through the landcare movement.
Thanks, team. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see your screen, your PowerPoint. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Can you hear the bell, by the way?
I will. Thank you.
Hear that bell?
Yes, thank you.
Good. I was just checking.
I might just start by saying when we talk about empowering something, we have to ask where the power already resides. What I'm going to be talking about is really the Landcare movement, but we might as easily talk about that as Landcare communities. The talks that I heard this morning from Landcarers in the Northern Territory, and probably following on very much from Keith's talk there, where he's provided an example of connecting people and nature and action, that you can hear coming through all of those things, the influence of the power being with people in those Landcare communities and how that makes such a difference to the sustainability of projects. And I'm going to talk a bit about what some of the challenges are in making sure that we continue to empower and support the Landcare communities because of the great benefits of supported Landcare, of the supported Landcare model. You know, we have great affection for that contact with nature. We see a lot in our ability to connect with nature. We see a lot of the necessity for hands-on activity. We see that as our contribution into the world in our lifetimes, and we see it going forward when we're involved in that. And that's one of the things that's been great about the Landcare movement and the many thousands of groups and the many tens of thousands of individuals who have joined the Landcare movement, which is really a loose association of people who identify with the concept, who draw on the ethic, who are interested in the techniques, and who are interested in the partnership and relationship components of being part of action in their communities in many ways. Not all of it is necessarily on ground, of course. Those groups are very diverse. They can be you know, they can be young people, they can be elderly people, they can cross migrant boundaries. There can be all kinds of people involved in all kinds of parts of our landscape. Some people even have to go out in the cold, apparently, to participate. And they can be in landscapes that are public or private. And some of the talks this morning were about public land spaces and the challenges that Landcare communities have in maintaining action in what are their natural landscapes and managing challenges against the development of private rights and opportunities for development where there are critical assets. And the driving forces of a neoliberal approach to the way that we manage the land can be very powerful, and it's only through that community coalitions that we really can confront some of those challenges. But of course, it's not just people joining together to be in Landcare. It takes a whole suite of skills to be involved. It can take you know, a range of skills to participate. It can require people to be technically savvy about the kinds of restoration, the kinds of activities that they're involved in. They can be very long-run programs. The planning for and managing after the investment has gone requires a resilience in communities that funding organisations and funding programs rarely respect. And it's the connection and cohesion within Landcare groups that form themselves, seek to participate, seek to network, and seek to collaborate with other not-for-profits and agencies that makes them powerful. And of course, it's very much a cultural experience for people as well, that they participate for the connections, for their because they have a desire to respect the land that they're on, its traditions, the traditional owners of that land, and the deep connections to country that many Australians look to as a way forward for how we are going to manage the landscape. And so people join and participate in Landcare for a whole suite of reasons. It isn't just on ground, of course. There's a lot of components to being to retaining resilience, building and maintaining that. There's a requirement for high-level communication, for connection between people around the country, in many different levels, and in local communities. Those communication challenges are there, and the communication component is part of that empowerment. It requires leadership at all levels, locally, state, in networks, states, nationally, and it draws on a massive human resource in that. It requires a lot of technical inputs, so they can be bringing capacity into Landcare communities, but it also can be building those capacities and then sharing them with the neighbouring groups or the next programs. And people come and go from participation in Landcare communities into many parts of life. And we did some network analysis showing that Landcare is a net user of resources from the community. That means that they're often from the CWA or the council or the football club, but they are also providing a service to that community by bringing resources that are not otherwise there, and building capacity within those. And of course, with knowledge and experience and connection, then we're able to share learning and take action in new places, and bring other people into a new way of looking at the challenges as they become ready for that. The need for this supported Landcare model, which has been somewhat forgotten in the desire for simplicity of procurement, comes out of a suite of things, and I'm just going to touch on these briefly. You know, they may be challenging for some people listening, but restoration and Landcare activities are often overcoming public good problems and negative externalities. So often public goods, particularly where they're public assets, and there are commons challenges or negative externalities on private lands, and these property rights challenges are very difficult to overcome with direct intervention. And while I'm not saying that we don't need market mechanisms. I'm incredibly pleased that my lunch arrived on time, was nutritious and tasty, and I'm thankful for markets for producing that lunch and bringing it to me. But we have to be careful about how we look at neoliberal solutions holistically, and we have to be aware that overcoming many of the market failure problems that drive our environment into the situation we find it requires community-led solutions. It requires people on the ground speaking up, joining together, building networks, and not only taking action, but also taking action with our voices. The top-down approaches that are frequently implemented, particularly when cycling of funds is relatively rapid. There's flashes of funds come available, and when you have flashes of nutrients, it's very often weeds that are quickest, and we get often lowest cost outcomes rather than the value for money benefits that we really seek. And so we have to be careful about those top-down approaches, because they can pop up pretty quickly, but they don't necessarily leave legacy. We also see that there are challenges in FIFO, not-for-profit activities that undermine community support. They are not there to invest in community to be the long-term custodians of the environment and to be the long-term purveyors of restoration. They are there because they are market-driven opportunists. And that includes passing off the brand of community activity, including the Landcare brand. And while I think anybody in Landcare is happy to have have the brand used to support the community movement and action for the environment, the misuse of those brands is a big problem, because it undermines that widespread network of many tens of thousands of people taking action. The full range of SDGs, which I think Ian showed us earlier, they are integrated. They require very strong solutions to be very bottom up. They are about poverty, gender, connection. They are about empowering, moving the power, finding the power in the on-ground movement and in those communities. And that's very difficult to do from institutional approaches which don't first take their lead from those communities. In Australia's investment in international development, we don't do it like we do environmental investment in Australia. In international investment for aid and community development, we're very conscious of how we connect with local communities. We don't just trust institutions. We are cautious about elite capture and all kinds of problems that we have in environmental investment in Australia, but that we tend to ignore because we either don't understand it or we want simple solutions that send a good PR message. And I say the need for supported land care because the work done by Aurecon and New South Wales Landcare shows that in that state, the economic, environmental and social benefits are amounting to about $500 million a year, which is in the order of $1.5 billion for the country per year from a supported land care model. And so there's a very, even at the level at which it operates at the moment, forecasting a need for this to grow, we're talking about a very significant amount of resource and benefits that can be generated by making sure that we invest in a supported model for land care. That supported model has many elements. I've jingoistically used another set of 3 R's. The first is that realization, understanding the difference between a supported and unsupported model is where you start. If you are looking at doing a project and then looking around for local groups that you want to involve in the project, you started at the wrong end. You have first to understand that local communities, land care communities, they already understand their environments. They understand the social context in which they occur. Being involved at the start is much more likely to lead to an integrated model than coming in when it suits you from wherever you are, particularly the FIFO approaches. Representation is critical. Representation means that the voice of those who are participating is at the heart of making decisions all the way through the networks and structures of organisations that allow growth and resilience in these organisations. It helps attract partners, volunteers, resources, and builds capacity because people trust in organisations where they have a voice. And after that, we seek resourcing, and that resourcing, if the first things are right, the resourcing leverages a very wide range of community interest and other resources, and leaves that behind for longevity. So those things are critical to the empowerment of land care communities through support, and provide an opportunity for real change across the entire country, and use, it's not to block other mechanisms that are available, but there are many people interested in participating in this way, and the broad suite of sustainable development goals require this approach. And I think we didn't see it any more acutely than when we start to face natural disasters, when people really look to the social, economic and environmental outcomes in their region, when they are brought together closely. Having lived as a teenager through bushfires in where I grew up on the farming community where I grew up, the weeks, months, even years afterwards were very close in that community about dealing with these challenges, including the people problems, the natural environment problems, the social and economic challenges. And Landcare is a first point of call for those places, and land carers were often the first people on the ground after disaster. And there's no pretending that there aren't significant environmental impacts, and that people look to the long term of sustaining their environments when they are looking to that long term, they are interested in approaches that help sustain them. We, Landcare, have been successful in gaining some funds to work through a more distributed model of investing in bushfire recovery. We're not quick in getting off the ground in that. The funds are only coming through in the next financial year, but it's a good step in the direction of reinvesting in Landcare communities, of avoiding some of the cost shifting and institutional capture that have plagued environmental investment in the last few years, and enabling local Landcare communities to take action in their neighbourhoods. So we look to that as a real positive and an opportunity to empower Landcare communities and to hear from them through their representative structures about success. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Patrick. And we actually have time for questions, which is excellent. So we're actually confining our questions to the topic of Landcare's response to the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So I'll ask the first question. Are you seeing the UN Decade as a potential stimulus for uptake of your messages?
Absolutely. So I think the Landcare movement is an embodiment of the things that are now invested in those sustainability goals. I'm not sure what the opportunities directly are, but part of our move on the bushfire recovery is to demonstrate the ability of the Landcare movement to take action in communities and to take restoration action. And so I think there are real opportunities there coming out of that decade.
Great. And can you see potential for collaboration between non-government or not-for-profit organisations in the UN Decade?
Yeah, of course. Collaborations are necessary. I think one of the challenges we face is that when resources are tight, not-for-profit organisations bleed into each other's territory, and that competitive approach and the overlapping has a cost to communities particularly, and community approaches particularly. So being clear about what our suite of institutions are and how they can act, and collaborating for best effect, and finding the power in our differences, that's probably the future, and that's certainly what Landcare looks for in partnerships with other organisations.
That's a great turn of phrase, the power in our differences. Yep, thanks very much for that. Is there a question from the audience while we have a minute left? I think everybody's very impressed.
There was a question from John, well, there was a hand raised from John.
Okay, there's a hand raised electronically from a virtual presenter. John, no? Name, please.
Thank you very much. Great presentation, Patrick. Liked it very much. Because it's the International Decade of Restoration, are there mechanisms for linking the Australian experience in Landcare, which is so enormously valuable, particularly the social capital formation, with other parts of the world, with Landcare in Africa, Landcare in the Philippines, Landcare in South Africa, etc.?
Yeah, so Landcare in Australia is growing. It's growing again. It's changing for the changing environment. So but we see that as a base for action in Australia and more widely. Global Landcare, which is an independent organisation but under the umbrella of Landcarers, they are also rebadging and looking to reach out to many of those international organisations. I went to Uganda 2 years ago by chance on another project, and the strongest institution in the district that I went to was Landcare. And there was, when I got there, they took me to the office. There were the emu and the kangaroo sitting over the top of the desk, smiling down on people who were connecting within their community to change the sustainability of coffee production and other things. So that some of that work has been done, and this decade is an opportunity to extend that for sure.
Fantastic. That's a really nice place to end this, and we really appreciate your contribution, Patrick. Thank you.